Loretta Fenn never threw away a single tractor part, not one. For 17 years, every seized injector, every cracked hydraulic fitting, every worn-out governor spring that came off the machines her neighbors brought to her yard went into the long cedar plank shed behind her house outside of Stettler, Alberta. Seized, stripped, sometimes nothing left but the housing. But she kept them. People talked, the way people in small towns always talk. Her neighbor Gus said she was turning the place into a junkyard. The woman at the post office once asked, not unkindly, whether Loretta had considered getting some help. Her son-in-law thought she'd lost perspective after her husband passed. She let them talk. She always did. Let me tell you about Loretta Fenn. Because most people who drove past that shed on County Road 12 never once stopped to wonder what she actually knew. She was 51 years old when this story starts, though she would have told you it started long before that. It started with her father, Gordon Fenn, who ran a mobile repair service out of a half-ton truck for 32 years, and who believed, with the same quiet certainty that he believed in crop rotation and tire chains before snow, that a machine's failure could always teach you something if you paid attention. Gordon Fenn did not throw parts away either. He documented them. He kept a row of green hardcover notebooks on the shelf above his workbench, each one dated, each one filled with his cramped, left-handed notes about what had failed and why, and what he had done about it. When Gordon died in the spring of 2001, he left Loretta those notebooks and the shed and the ability to read a diesel engine the way other people read a room, quietly, without announcing what she'd figured out. She left school after grade 11, same as a lot of kids did in that part of Alberta in the late 80s. She married Roy Fenn at 22, had 2 daughters, helped Roy run the mixed farm until his heart gave out in 1998. After that, she sold the cattle, kept the land leased out to a cousin, and started doing what her father had taught her. She fixed things. Specifically, she fixed Beaumont-Stiles tractors. If you farmed in central Alberta in the 90s and 2000s, you knew Beaumont-Stiles. It was not John Deere. It was not Case or New Holland. It was a mid-range line built in Ontario, acquired in 1991 by an agricultural equipment company out of Calgary called Meridian Agricultural Holdings, and it occupied a particular niche. It was affordable enough that smaller operations could buy it, durable enough in its bones that they kept buying it, and just complex enough in its hydraulic and fuel systems that when something went wrong, farmers needed help. The help in that region came through a dealer network, and in the triangle between Stettler, Coronation, and Castor, that network ran almost entirely through one man. His name was Keith Drover. Keith ran Drover Agricultural Services out of a large, well-lit building on the highway just west of Stettler. He had the Beaumont-Stiles dealership. He had the factory parts account. He had the certified technicians, or at least the people Meridian had certified, which was not always the same thing. And he had, from about 2004 onward, the exclusive supply arrangement that meant if you needed a genuine Beaumont-Stiles hydraulic pump assembly, a factory-spec injector set, or a replacement governor module for the Series 4 engine, you went through Keith Drover. There was no other option within 200 kilometers. Loretta had been doing repairs for 6 years before this became a problem she could not work around. The early years were fine. She worked on older machines already out of warranty, sourcing parts where she could through secondary suppliers and agricultural salvage operations in Saskatchewan. She charged fair rates. She showed up when she said she would. In a farming community, that last part mattered more than most people realized. By 2005, she had more work than she could easily manage alone. She had a waiting list through planting season. She had farmers calling her from as far as Hanna and Drumheller, asking if she could come look at their Series 3 or Series 4. She had, without intending to build one, built a reputation, and Keith Drover had noticed. You have to understand how the parts relationship worked. Loretta could not buy genuine Beaumont-Stiles components directly from Meridian. She wasn't a dealer. She could order through Keith, and Keith, starting in 2005, began to develop a habit of being unavailable. Parts she needed in a week took 3. Parts, he said, were back-ordered, sometimes appeared on his own work orders 2 days later. Prices quoted to her were not the prices she later heard quoted to farmers who went to him directly. She didn't make accusations. She kept records. She had learned that from Gordon, too. Keep records. Write down dates. Keep copies of everything. Not because you're expecting a fight, because a written record turns your memory into something a room full of people can look at. By 2007, the situation had sharpened. Loretta needed a set of hydraulic pump seals for a Series 4 belonging to a wheat farmer named Peter Alcott, who was 3 weeks from harvest. Keith quoted her an 8-week lead time. She called Meridian directly to ask about availability. They told her the part was in stock at the regional distribution center in Red Deer. When she relayed this to Keith, he said there must have been a miscommunication. The parts arrived in 6 days. She thanked him. She wrote down the date. This is the part of the story that people miss when they talk about someone like Loretta Fenn. They look at the shed full of salvaged parts and they see hoarding. They look at the notebooks full of dates and part numbers and they see obsession. What they don't see is the logic underneath it. The long, patient logic of a woman who had watched her father run a fair business in a difficult environment for 32 years, and who understood that the environment had changed, and that the only thing she could control was what she knew and what she kept. She had started quietly cataloging the machines. Every Beaumont-Stiles Series 3 and 4 unit that came through her yard, for repair, for assessment, occasionally bought outright when a farmer was selling off, she documented engine serial number, hours, known failure history, which components had been replaced and when and with what. She photographed everything. She drew diagrams when photographs weren't enough, and when a machine was beyond economical repair, when a farmer decided to scrap it rather than fix it, she asked if she could have it, or parts of it. Usually they said yes. Some of them helped her load the pieces into her truck. She gave some of them a case of beer. She gave Peter Alcott a bottle of rye whiskey the Christmas after harvest that year. The seized machines began accumulating in the shed. Her daughters thought she had developed a coping mechanism for grief and were supportive in the careful, slightly worried way of adult children who love their mother and do not entirely understand her. Her son-in-law Trevor made one comment at a family dinner in 2008 about the liability implications of running a business out of a personal property and did not make the comment again. Loretta did not explain herself extensively. She fixed machines, she kept records, she kept parts, and meanwhile Keith Drover's operation grew. He hired a 3rd certified technician in 2006. He expanded the service bay in 2009. He took on the Beaumont-Stiles commercial account for 2 county municipalities that were running the Series 4 on road maintenance equipment. He was, by any visible measure, doing well. There was a version of the story where Loretta eventually grew too old and too tired and eventually closed down the operation, sold the land, and moved closer to her daughters in Red Deer. There was a version where Keith Drover's dealership just kept running, generation to generation, and the farmers in that triangle kept paying what he'd charged because there was no other option. That was not the version that happened. In the fall of 2013, Meridian Agricultural Holdings announced that it was discontinuing the Beaumont-Stiles line. The Series 4 would be the last. Existing units would continue to be supported for parts for 5 years, after which the supply arrangement would end. They were pivoting, the press release said, toward precision agriculture technology integration. The farm equipment press covered it for a week. In Stettler, farmers who were running 3 or 4 Series 4 units on their operations started making calls, trying to understand what the support period actually meant in practice and how worried they should be. Keith Drover sent out a letter to his customer base, telling them not to panic. The 5-year support commitment was solid. He was well positioned to support them through the transition. Loretta read the announcement and went out to the shed and stood in it for a long time. She had, at that point, 11 full Beaumont-Stiles units in various states of disassembly, plus an organized inventory of components pulled from another 9 machines. She had her father's green notebooks and her own continuation of them, 14 volumes in total, covering every failure mode she had ever encountered in the Series 3 and 4 lines. She had, without anyone telling her to and without any clear plan, built a parts library that covered approximately 40% of the known failure points for those engines and hydraulic systems. She went back inside, made coffee, and called her daughter Nora. "I'm going to need help with the inventory," she said. "What kind of help?" "Spreadsheet kind, and probably a proper photograph for everything." Nora drove out the following weekend. She brought her laptop and her husband, Trevor, who said nothing about liability and spent most of Sunday pulling components out of their storage bins and holding them up while Loretta photographed them against a white bedsheet hung from the shed wall. By the end of the weekend, they had a working inventory of over 400 distinct components. This is where you might ask, what was she planning to do with all of it? Sell parts directly to farmers? She had no dealer license. She wasn't Meridian. She was a farm woman in her late 50s with a shed full of used equipment and a stack of notebooks. Here is what she was planning to do. She was planning to keep fixing machines, the same thing she had always done, only now she would be able to fix them for longer, and with the parts she already had, without ever calling Keith Drover again. She told 2 farmers, Peter Alcott and a woman named Iris Goddard, who ran a mixed grain operation near Coronation and who had been bringing her machines to Loretta since 2006. She told them quietly, over coffee, that she had inventory, that she would not be raising her rates, and that when Meridian's official support period ended, she would likely be the only person in the region who could still source components for their machines without a 3-province salvage search. She asked them not to spread it around too widely. They spread it around carefully, the way farmers spread useful information, one conversation at a time, at the co-op, at the elevator, at the equipment auction in Camrose. By the spring of 2014, Loretta had 9 farmers on a quiet list of people she would call first if she came across a specific component they needed. Keith Drover did not know about the list. The 5-year Meridian's support commitment began to unravel about 2 years in. This was not Meridian's fault, exactly. The distribution center in Red Deer reduced staffing as the line wound down. Lead times extended. A hydraulic governor assembly that had taken 2 weeks to source in 2012 was taking 3 months by 2015. Keith Drover's letters to his customer base grew more reassuring in tone as the situation grew less reassuring in practice. In August 2015, a farmer named Douglas Archibald, that name is in the list. His name was Raymond Bast. Raymond ran 4 Series 4 units on a canola operation near Halkirk. He needed a fuel injection pump for his primary unit. Keith quoted him 16 weeks and a price that Raymond later described at the co-op as being in the range of what a man might pay for a used half-ton. Someone at the co-op mentioned Loretta's name. Raymond called her on a Tuesday. He drove out on Thursday. She walked him into the shed, found the injection pump in the 3rd row of shelving, rebuilt, tested, documented in Notebook 11, and quoted him a price that was less than a third of what Keith had mentioned. He stood there for a moment looking at the shelves. "How long have you had all this?" he said. 17 years, she said, give or take. He had the pump installed by the following Monday. He made the call himself that time. His neighbor, then his neighbor's cousin, then a man he'd known since junior hockey who farmed near Forestburg. And here is the part that Loretta had not planned for, but that her father might have seen coming, the part that still feels, when you hear it, like something that could not have been arranged by any amount of careful preparation. Keith Drover had been carrying debt. The expansion in 2009 had been financed at rates that made sense in 2009. The commercial municipal contracts had looked stable until the county changed procurement policy in 2016 and went to open tender. He lost one contract entirely to a dealer out of Red Deer and retained the second at a margin that barely covered his overhead on it. His Beaumont-Stiles warranty revenue, once a reliable income stream, had dried up as the machines aged out of anything resembling warranty territory. He had other lines. He'd taken on a small engine equipment distributorship in 2014, but small engines were not what had built the business. In March 2017, Keith Drover Agricultural Services went into receivership. It happened quickly, the way these things do once the decision is made. The creditors moved in, the assets were assessed, the inventory was listed, and on the inventory, among the tools and the shop equipment and the remaining new units, were the parts, the Beaumont-Stiles components that Keith had been holding as stock, not the Meridian supply account, which had closed out, but his own physical inventory of parts he had ordered in anticipation of demand that had not materialized the way he'd projected. Governor assemblies, injector sets, hydraulic pump housings, seal kits. Components that had sat on Keith's shelves for 2 and 3 years because the machines were aging and farmers who needed those parts had found other ways to solve their problems. The receiver contacted Loretta on a Wednesday. She had known Keith Drover for 12 years. She had dealt with him through 8 years of difficult phone calls and delayed orders and pricing that she had documented in a separate notebook that she kept in the house rather than the shed. She had never, in 12 years, spoken to him about any of it directly. She drove to Stettler on a Friday morning and met with the receiver's representative in Keith's old office. The representative was a young man from Calgary who knew nothing about Beaumont-Stiles equipment and who had been trying for 2 weeks to figure out what the parts inventory was worth. She brought Notebook 14. She knew what every component on the list was. She knew which ones were still useful, which ones were for machines that had already been scrapped, which ones were duplicates of things she already held. She made an offer on the components she wanted. The representative accepted it by the end of the day. She drove home with her truck loaded and a trailer behind it. She called Nora from the highway. "How did it go?" Nora said. "I need you to update the spreadsheet," Loretta said. "Have you ever thought about what it means to keep something for 17 years without knowing exactly what you were keeping it for? Not because you had a plan, not because you were certain it would matter, but because your father taught you that knowledge compounds and parts are just a form of knowledge, and the thing you understand that no one else in the room understands is always going to be worth more than they think it is." Loretta Fenn spent the following 2 years working through the components she had acquired from the receiver. She matched them against her inventory. She fulfilled orders for Peter Alcott and Iris Goddard and Raymond Bast and 14 other farmers who had been on the quiet list. She charged fair rates. She showed up when she said she would. She did not expand into a dealership. She did not try to go into business the way Keith Drover had been in business. She had never wanted that. What she wanted was what she had always had, the ability to fix a machine properly and have the right part for it when she needed one. She had that now, in a way she had not had it for 17 years. Her son-in-law Trevor came out to help move some of the heavier components one September weekend and stood in the shed afterward with a cup of coffee, looking at the rows of shelves. "Did you always know this was going to happen?" he said. "With the dealership?" She thought about it for a moment. "No," she said. "I just knew that what I had in here was worth something. I didn't need to know the exact reason in advance." Trevor nodded. He looked like a man filing something away for future reference. The notebooks are still on the shelf above the workbench. 14 green, hardcover volumes in her father's handwriting continued in her own. Notebook 15 is about half full. She does not know yet how many there will be before she is done. She never threw a part away, not one. And in the end, it was not patience that saved her, and it was not luck, and it was not anything as simple as outlasting someone. It was the 17 years of knowing exactly what she had, down to the bin number and the engine serial it had come from, while the man with the dealership only knew what he was owed. That is a different kind of knowledge. It is also, as it turns out, a more durable one.